Well, you might have noticed in the news this week that there's been a lot of talk about the endings of long-running TV series. It even made the newspapers and things. It appears that no matter how brilliant the format, when the show reaches its final episode, you can never satisfy all of us. Some stories end in what some people think are rather disappointing ways, because there's not enough high drama. And others leave unanswered questions which people will be talking about in years to come and try and work out what the writer was trying to say. But thankfully, the story we read this morning, which is about the end of Jesus' life on earth, that is a brilliant ending to this particular story. It's certainly got enough special effects to keep us satisfied with angels and so on. But it has a final twist that affects all of us. The hero is going home, and the continuing task is handed over, not to an army of superheroes, but to his very ordinary friends, who've spent the last 3 years messing up, saying stupid things, not recognizing what was right in front of them, and actually running away to hide when things got tough. For them, it's time to say goodbye after 3 years of extraordinary friendship, followed by a period of extreme trauma, then exaltation, and then shock, and followed by, after that, 40 days of eating and talking and teaching. But this is the final farewell, and it's accompanied by instructions and reassurances, and from now on, there's new work to be done. If you like, it's a new series of the stories going to be written and performed by a cast of thousands. Because when Jesus told this motley crew to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, he was also talking to us. So how do we go about fulfilling that commission? I think it's quite helpful to look at the circumstances which surround this story, because I think they give us foundations upon which we can build. Beginning, if you like, with where it took place. They're back on the mountain. That's really familiar surroundings, because there many life-changing events have already happened. It's a place, though, where Jesus was always in control, teaching them and gifting them, and for some of them even being transfigured in front of them. It's good to remember that Jesus gives us places to call home, where there are memories and reminders of his presence. And this building, which we're in right now, is one of them. But there are many, many more throughout our lives, places where we can be re-energized for the demands of the task. Places where we are surrounded by friends and like-minded people who have shared our experiences and can interpret what's gone before. Because places like these and the people we share them with draw us into a shared community of memory and faith. It's interesting to me that the experience of watching Jesus leave in that dramatic way was shared by all the believers who were there that day, whether they'd been with him from the beginning or had joined his followers at different times and places. And everyone there received the same commission. But all of them would have carried it out in personal ways, depending upon the gifts and talents which God had given them. I love a quote I read this week from one writer who says that whenever he sees Christians doing things differently from him, he doesn't say, "What's wrong with them?" but rather, "What can I learn from them?" As Christians, we need to find common ground so that the people around us are attracted by our compassion and humility and not repelled by infighting and scathing criticism. After all, that task to go and make disciples is a shared one. We're not supposed to do it alone or rely just on our own gifts and talents. We're meant to work collectively. And to do that, we have to rely on God's power source together, which on the occasion of this story had not yet been revealed. The disciples had to wait until they were ready, but they had to do that together, praying and listening for God's sign to get moving, because the work was going to be more than they could handle without his infilling power. What's more, they were not an exclusive bunch of people, even though they didn't yet know it, because those people that they were going to disciple and baptize would soon swell their numbers. And in less than 40 years, the whole empire would know that they were there. And actually, nothing really has changed since. Because when Jesus gave us that command to go and make disciples, the reason for the church's existence was then established. And places and people and shared experiences and collective memories were going to be right at the heart of it. And above all, we can be assured that because Jesus has been given all authority, as his people, so have we.
These were Jesus' final resurrection appearances to his friends. And to use an analogy from athletics, he was passing on the baton of his ministry to his friends who were following him. And that baton has been handed on down the centuries and has now reached us. So, having picked it up from the previous generation of Christians and ultimately back in time from Jesus himself, our task is to continue running that race. The writer to Hebrews would say that we run with perseverance. The Apostle Paul might have said that we run with faith, hope, and above all, love. And the instructions that Jesus gave were to be his witnesses, or if you like, his teammates, his representatives, effectively to run to the ends of the earth and make disciples. So if in making disciples we're to follow the other thing that he told his followers to do, and to teach new disciples everything that he taught, well, what does that mean? Perhaps it's helpful to remember that Jesus himself sums up all of his teaching, the whole of the law and the prophets, in two simple but deeply profound commands: to love God and to love others. Some commentators add a third imperative to love, which is to love the world. And that's arguably part of loving God, because God's very first command to humanity was to care for the world that he'd made, everything and everyone in it. The daily reflections that we're currently using describe this as loving God with all we've got through prayer and creativity, loving others as we love ourselves through justice and hospitality, which is something we're all going to need to rediscover in the coming months as we're once more allowed to open up our homes to others. And then finally, loving the world by carrying the good news of Jesus to its farthest reaches through our engagement in learning and mission. These are the behaviours and practices that will be effective in helping us to be Jesus' witnesses to the whole world, to the part of the world that we find ourselves in today as this small part of his church, and to those who come to us from the global village that the world has become. I've been deeply struck by the fact that even in the midst of the travel restrictions of a worldwide pandemic, God has still seen fit to bring travellers to us for help from other countries. Just in the last few weeks, we've been privileged to welcome visitors here at our in-person services from Eastern Europe. That was totally unexpected. And then if you think about some of the people who've been part of our church community over recent years, you will quickly realise that we've provided at least a temporary home, and Pauline spoke about homes earlier, a temporary home for people from as far afield as the USA and South Africa, the Congo and Estonia, Jamaica and India and Sri Lanka, and even some of our British contingent have been travellers returning from countries like Botswana and elsewhere. And our long-standing members, people who've been with us for 10, 20, 30 years, come from such diverse places as Germany and Zimbabwe.
And Wales.
And Wales and the West Indies. Perhaps it's because we're a Baptist church rather than the Church of England that people from other parts of the world are more likely to connect with us. Even when we've not been able to meet in person, we've heard of people connecting with these online services from such exotic places as Aberdeen and New Zealand, Manchester and Tonopandi.
Oh, it's very exotic.
It is, and elsewhere. And by the way, if you are one of those people, why not go to the Contact Us page on our website and drop us a line? We would love to hear from you, and if you want we'd love to pass on a greeting that would bless the church here. So somehow, even here in little old Dedworth, which, let's face it, very few people outside Windsor have ever heard of, even here we seem to have a global reach. Or perhaps it's the other way round. Perhaps we have the privilege of being on the receiving end of the world reaching out to us. The receiving end of Jesus' commission. The world reaching out to us to teach us more about what it means to follow Jesus. Think about that for a moment. In what ways have sisters and brothers from other cultures and other traditions enriched our lives, enriched your life, by teaching us something about what it means to obey everything that Jesus taught us, and by helping us to grow in our faith? Surely that's something that we should celebrate and thank God for. Either way, our diversity of culture and tradition is a valuable part of our ministry, one that we should embrace and not ignore, because it enriches our life together. So, how can we make sure that we are loving God and loving others and loving the world? Well, perhaps just one simple tip is this: to simply, at the end of each day, reflect back on what we've done and to identify those times when our words or actions have been less than loving, and then to confess them to the God who loves us so much that he died to deal with our sin and our failings so that we could receive his forgiveness and be part of his family. And then, as part of that, to ask for a fresh filling of his Holy Spirit, who he gives us so that we can live for him, taking the good news of Jesus to the whole world, including those parts of the world that come to us. By being faithful in our love for God, compassionate in our love for others, and diligent in our love for the world that God has made. And as we simply focus on doing that, may God make us good teachers of the way of Jesus and shining witnesses to his love, so that we in turn can pass the baton on to the next generation of Jesus followers.
Well, one of the ways that we can all show God's love to the world is by supporting organisations such as Christian Aid. And they aim to expose and end poverty so that people, as they say, can enjoy life before death. This year's Christian Aid Week starts tomorrow, So have a look in our weekly bulletin and look out for any emails or online campaigning for more information about how you can give towards their work this year, because the pandemic means that envelope collections are not currently possible. And to help you think about the sort of help that's needed, the sorts of things that your gifts and donations go towards, and how you can pray more effectively, here is the story of one woman who lives in Kenya. This is Florence's story.